And no. Hey everyone, welcome back. Week 12. No, sorry, week 11. Yesterday we were in Mark chapter 11 looking at a story. We're in the Passion Week now, Monday of the Passion Week. Jesus is traveling from Bethany to Jerusalem, sees a fig tree, curses it, goes into Jerusalem, creates a scene in the temple, and then the very next morning, which would have been Tuesday morning of the Passion Week, they walk past the fig tree again, and it's withered to its roots. And Jesus tells his disciples to have faith in God. So interesting story, a lot going on there. And we all were just trying to make it make sense yesterday in our local churches. So Dan Williams, why don't you start us off this week and just share a little bit about how things went yesterday and what part of the message you thought was maybe most helpful?
I can start with my insight, and Yon, you can feel free to jump in if you have any insight from a listener's perspective, being that you were there. But uh, if I go by the response of the audience, there was a visible, audible response to my illustration about barriers that religious leaders inadvertently or advertently put up in their gatherings that keep outsiders outside and keep insiders in power, in profit, profiteering mode, and so on. And it was when I told the story about a joint service between the youth when I was youth pastoring and the adults, where we had a missionary on a midweek service, and the missionary somehow targeted this teenager who had a hat on and ridiculed him and almost like antagonizing him to a fight, and said that he wanted him to take his hat off. And when the kid didn't know that he was talking to him, he started to kind of like bully language. Yeah, I'm talking to you, big guy, tough guy, blah, blah, blah. And he just reamed him out. And there was an audible gasp when I said, of course, it's hard to imagine somebody doing that from the platform. It's hard to imagine somebody who's a teenager getting treated like that from the platform, who's there and present, who's just sitting there. And then the gasp came when I explained that kid, the twist in the plot is that kid was there for his very first night after getting out of jail. That we had been working really hard to get that kid there. We had been praying and working with his parents to see if we could get him to reappear among the youth ministry and so on. And it was a devastating first night for us. And, again, just using that as an illustration that there are barriers in place. The barrier I was illustrating was dress code barriers, which of course is low hanging fruit. That's an easy one. But that's probably the best example I could give of something landing that I was aware of or alert to, and personally from the speaker's perspective.
Yeah, and kind of a similar point in the message here at Trinity, we were, Jesus, his whole line, my house should be a house of, a house of worship and prayer for the nations. You've turned it into a den of thieves. He's quoting from the Old Testament, a couple places, I think, but Jeremiah 7 is where I kind of looked. And God tells Jeremiah 600 years before this, go stand in the temple and proclaim to the people, don't be deceived by the words, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. And in my studies, what I learned was that, there were three times a year that every good Jewish person went to the temple: Passover, Pentecost, Feast of Tabernacles. And Jeremiah was basically saying, you're deceiving yourselves because you're doing the bare minimum. Like you're showing up when every good Jewish person shows up, but it means nothing to you. You honor me with your lips. Your heart is far from me. And I think what landed the heaviest in our room, and it was a little bit of a heavier message. One of those messages where afterwards people were like, I really feel convicted. Thank you. I needed that. It's not really my style per se, but the text kind of brings you there a little bit. But what I said to people was, when we're talking about the proof of the genuineness of our faith, that we really love Jesus and are disciples of Jesus, probably the least reliable evidence is what happens on a Sunday morning in a church, because everyone knows how to show up and look apart and sing along and sit and listen and look spiritual and be religious. So if you're wondering, am I a genuine follower of Jesus, and you are relying upon the evidence of your Sunday morning attendance or your Sunday morning engagement, or even your willingness to serve on a Sunday, it is the most unreliable source of evidence. What's really matters is basically the rest of our week, the rest of our lives. How do we embody the work and life of Christ in our neighborhoods, in our workplaces? How do we love our spouses and be faithful to them? How do we disciple and raise our children to love and follow Jesus? How do we live with integrity in the workplace? How do we engage with people who can do nothing for us? And I think for a lot of people, it was not what we have a lot of new people in the church who probably think that what pastors really just want for you is Sunday morning activity, engagement, and attendance. And I did give the caveat of those are good things. That is important. However, like Jesus is saying to the whole temple system, you got this appearance of growth, but there's no fruit and you're dying and you're decaying. Of course, that's the metaphor of the fig tree, that it had flowers but no fruit. It was a dead tree. It looked good from a distance, but up close, upon examination, it was dead. And then it withers to its roots. And I just kind of said to the church, we have to pray, God, let that never be true of us, that our lives would be withered away to its roots, or that our church would be withered away, or that we would be growing and not realizing that there's no fruit. And so it felt like a heavier one. And yet, of course, at the end, like all of us, I was able to point to Christ and lift our hearts and see that Jesus is the hope, not our efforts, his work. So anyway, yeah. Danny, you want to jump in?
Yeah, we like to identify ourselves with Jesus in that story, but we are the purposeless temple that's not doing the right thing, and we are the withered tree. We made, there's a mix of people. A lot of newer Christians in my church. When newer, I mean, last 2 years, maybe 3 years, and then people who've been going a long time. And so I made the analogy of everybody wants to be Jesus flipping tables and wants to give you a reason to behave a certain way. But when we identify ourselves in the story, we are the reason Jesus is flipping tables. We are that fruitless tree. And so how do we become this purposeful temple? How do we become this fruitful tree? And it's that truth, that have faith in God. And it was a beautiful, beautiful time with the church. Very, very well responded to, just in terms of the conversations afterwards in the hallway. I mean, you can see, not that I necessarily did a great job. It was just that the word was so rich. It was just, I don't think that they really understood that avenue that we brought to the table either from a new Christian or even from a longtime Christian. And it was just a beautiful, beautiful spirit of worship, realizing, Lord, investigate my heart, inspect my heart. And Lord, if I'm not bearing fruit, man, today I want to bear fruit. And it was a powerful time together.
Love that. Love that. Keith?
Yeah, we had a great Sunday. For us, it was our annual Vision Sunday. So Amy and I preached together, and she focused on the tree. I focused on the temple, and we framed the whole message around inspection and expectation, which was beautiful for Vision Sunday, because for us, we share with the church. It's kind of like when you pop the hood and you go in for your car inspection and you're making sure things are working right. It kind of looks good, but you're not sure if you're supposed to live with that check engine light or not. And the mechanic tells you you're not supposed to. It was kind of the touch point at the beginning. And here's Jesus going into Jerusalem and saying, you look good, but there's a check engine light on, and we gotta fix some things here. I think what stood out the most as, like you guys are sharing, the church is mixed. There's people who have been serving Jesus for a long time, and then there's those who are new. Those that have read this passage before, some were sharing with me that they were grateful that, like you were just sharing, Danny, the temple moment was all about the court of the Gentiles and stopping those who are outsiders from getting into the presence of God, that they've kind of heard it shared in other ways of, more about us and how, we've got to do some changing for ourselves and make the church a better place for us. And we just really hammered in on the fact that this always has to be about those who don't know Jesus yet. And for a Vision Sunday, we shared our finances with the church from the front of the room, and kind of contrasted with the fact that there were money changers sitting at the table exploiting outsiders, charging interest rates, and really just trying to make it about their own profit. And we were able to take that and say, look, the finances that are given here have to be about mission, have to be about making sure that outsiders are always meeting Jesus. That is our mission. And without that, we will have mission drift. And Jesus is always inspecting us as individuals. And we're asking him to inspect us today as a church collective. So I got a lot of great feedback. And, it was, similarly to what you were sharing, Dan, like the heaviness in that moment of what tables have we set up to stop others from meeting Jesus that is just our preferences to make it more about us. And Jesus wants to come in and say, this is a house for all nations. That was kind of our big, which is Isaiah, that big theme for us is this has to be about all nations meeting Jesus. So it was a wonderful passage. I was grateful that the text that we chose, I mean, however many months ago, landed where our Vision Sunday always is.
I was just going to ask you that, Keith. I was just going to ask you how thrilling was it to have the juice that the text and the vision just kind of propelled each other.
It's just that validation that the Spirit's not just in the spontaneous. Maybe he's involved in preparation.
Stop it, Baptist.
Come on, man. So it was a beautiful Sunday.
That's awesome. One of the tensions we talked about all week was the temple being what it was then versus Jesus being the true and better temple. And then the New Testament language, specifically Paul's language, that we now are the temple of God, and kind of how do we apply what's happening in this story to where we are today, both as a church and as a family, because it's clearly not just about a building today. I mean, that's clear.
Mm-hmm.
And having said that, I kind of got to push in on what you were talking about, Keith, where there was a point in the message where I just said, what would it look like if every person who walked into this church on a Sunday morning, instead of thinking, what can I get out of this morning for me, thinking, who here can I serve? Who here can I love? Who here can I encourage? Who here can I pray for and come alongside? If 100% of our church family was thinking that, every need would be met, every person would be cared for, and your needs would be met also, because you'd be surrounded by people who share your heart. And just trying to challenge, I think we always have to look for ways to push in on that consumeristic mentality of going to church and getting something out of it from me. We actually have two guys listening in right now. Nick Adwapalker, pastor down in the Bronx, who's going to be preaching for Danny next Sunday. So you get to hear from him next week. And Yon Whiteway, who's going to be preaching for Dan Williams this Sunday. Yon, you got to hear Dan's message, or I think you did. I know sometimes you teach classes on Sundays. Anything you want to add to the conversation before we wrap?
Well, just to speak to just how I guess the Holy Spirit works in kind of conjunction. We as you just said, the idea we had a training, we have a Bloom track training for our leaders right after service, and that specifically was focusing on serving other people and embracing the identity of how to use being servants. We're a family of missionary servants who make disciples, and so we were training on serving and then disciple and for the purpose of disciple making. So I like that we have a consistent theme in our church that we're always outsider focused. We're always hospitality driven. Everyone's on the hospitality team, and but then also layering in that um, implicit identity of being a servant and being considerate of saying, how do we serve people even in the way that when they come in, and removing barriers. And so it aligned nicely just with our leadership training that we had planned long ago. So it's pretty neat.
Great. It's almost
My
like,
favorite.
go ahead.
So go ahead, Dave. No, you.
You go.
I don't know that I landed it the way that I had pictured and prayed that it would, but the thing I was most amped up to share was the working through Jesus's references to how he's replacing the temple, and that now when people come to meet with God, they aren't coming to the court of Gentiles. They are coming to he himself. He says that you're going to tear down this temple in 3 days. I'm going to build it back up. And then he says that, literally says, the temple I'm referring to is me. It's not a temple, right? So, but the idea that this is what got me really, really worked up was the idea that he cursed a tree that was no longer fruitful in bringing people to the Father in heaven. And he himself was going to absorb the curse on another tree that he willingly put himself through and put himself on. So I really, you can see why it didn't really land so great. I had a hard time coming up with the right language, but the idea that he curses a tree that is unfruitful and then takes the curse of all of humankind and sin, death, and the grave on himself on another tree and replaces the temple and becomes the temple. And now when you're looking to approach the Father, there's only one gathering place, and it's at the person of Jesus and his work. And because we were kind of running out of time, I found myself rushing through that, unfortunately. And of course, minutes after it was over, I was like, that was my main message. I can't believe I put myself in a position to rush through that.
Yeah, it was beautiful. I mean, I could have done a better job.
Oh, you heard
of
it?
temple description.
You heard it?
No. I'm going to hear it. I listen to everybody every week.
I'm just kidding.
I'm going to hear it.
Gosh.
But
Oh my gosh.
but our church has a little bit of call and response atmosphere to it. It's not heavy, but let me tell you, when we were talking about Jesus became the curse for us, the room was just full of light. It was a beautiful gospel moment to your point, Dan. And so it was exciting time, exciting day.
Yeah, I was smarter than both of you because Amy did that gospel tie-in and she crushed it.
Nice.
I knew I couldn't articulate it well.
We need somebody. We need somebody
Bro, she
on
went
our
Pentecostal, dude.
Keith on our Sundays. We need somebody to land the Jesus part.
Yeah,
our church.
I don't do that
Pray
part
for me.
Oh, awesome. Thanks, guys. We're looking forward to next week. Mark 12, Yon and Nick will be joining with us. You'll get to hear more from them next week. Thanks, guys.